Irish Breakdown Nation, welcome back to the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Monday, April 7th. It is my mom's birthday. I want to begin today's show wishing my mother a very, very happy 69th birthday. Happy birthday, Mom. Had 17th anniversary for Ange and I this past weekend, so it's been a busy, busy time. But of course, Sean, lots of Notre Dame football stuff going on today. So we got plenty of topics to talk about today. It's going to be the RTCF show. And today's show, we're going to look at three different topics. The R stands for recruiting, and we're going to talk D-line recruiting. We have a lot to say about D-line recruiting, and there will be a little wide receiver recruiting mixed in because some comparisons between the two. We'll talk about that. Then in the team focus, we're going to talk about Notre Dame's potential to turn 2024 into a longer-term run similar to teams we've seen in the past. We're going to discuss, is that where Notre Dame is now? Or is this going to be kind of like a 2014 Oregon, a 2016 Washington, a 2022 TCU, where that run is sort of a one-off? And so, where they'll still be good, but not good like they were in that 2024 season. So we're going to discuss that, reasons why we think that this may be a run, and then some of the potential stumbling blocks to that not happening, Sean. And then, of course, the CF part of the RTCF show is college football. And today we're gonna talk about some teams, Sean, that you and I view as potentially taking a step back this season. We'll define what step back means and go over some of those teams. We have some similarities there. I want to ask him about a couple that I have. There's a couple that he has that I'm gonna want to ask him about. So it's gonna be a lot of fun. And then we'll just briefly talk about Drew Pine going to Bowling Green and what that means for him, and just kind of a warning to portal kids everywhere. We'll talk about that as well. So it's going to be a fun show today, Sean. So, man, I got to tell you, Sean, I'm excited, man. We've been talking about we got multiple topics we want to talk about. We're going to have a conversation about the secondary here on one of these shows, probably next week's Blue Gold game. Next week's RTCF show. Maybe we might have to partner together for a show this week because it may just be something we want to talk about super, super sooner. So we'll find out. We'll find out, Sean. But I got to tell you, man, I'm excited, really excited about today's show.
Super excited. Always great topics and always a great time with Notre Dame fans, IB Nation. And of course, happy birthday. You know what? So special. She's a special woman. I've yet to meet her, and I look forward to meeting her in person really soon this upcoming season. She had to be special to birth and grow and develop this gentleman next to me. She had a different anointing on her life.
Facts.
Happy birthday.
Well, she will greatly appreciate that, Sean. I know she adores you, so it's going to be a fun show. So I want to get rocking and rolling, Sean, because if we go too far into the intros, then you and I go on forever because we have a lot to discuss today. And I want to dive in first to this recruiting conversation because obviously, we did a show on Saturday breaking down the commitment of Ebenezer Iwatade. And Sean, you've actually gotten to know this young man pretty well. You got to know his coaches pretty well. So we shared some of the things that you had shared with me about how good of a job that Marcus Freeman and Al Washington, especially Al Washington, is important. Marcus Freeman's always kind of been a strong recruiter. But just the job that Al Washington did with this young man. And we're going to talk about just in general, Sean, D-line recruiting, because this is an interesting period for Notre Dame when it comes to recruiting the defensive line position because, you and I have had a lot of conversations over the years about a lot of the excuse making that gets made when it comes to recruiting at Notre Dame. And I remember when they were struggling to recruit running backs from like 16 to, I don't know, whenever Lance Taylor was hired. Well, just top running backs don't want to come to Notre Dame. Well, they did when Tony Alford was, yeah, but Tony Alford's unique. Okay, as soon as Autry Denson leaves, Lance Taylor goes out and signs Kyron Williams 1 year, and then he goes out and gets Audric Estime and Logan Diggs the next year, and then Jadarian Price the next year. And then lo and behold, he leaves, and Dylan McCullough shows up, and he lands Jeremiah Love and Kedron Young and Aeneas Williams and Nolan James Jr. And now all of a sudden, Jawan Sider's here. And guess what? Top running backs are visiting Notre Dame again. So was it really that hard to recruit running backs in Notre Dame? Or maybe it was the coach who told A.J. Dillon he wasn't good enough to play running back here, just wasn't a good recruiter. And you look at receiver recruiting. That miraculously after they had the stretch of receiver recruiting they had, just top receivers didn't want to come to Notre Dame anymore. Or maybe was there a problem with the receivers coach and what he did? We've seen that with offensive line recruiting over the years. It's like, man, Notre Dame just can't recruit top linemen anymore. Well, then all of a sudden Ed Warner gets replaced by Harry Hiestand, and lo and behold, top recruits want to come to Notre Dame again. And I feel like, Sean, that's true at almost every position, with one exception. Defensive line recruiting fits that mold as well. And every position has kids that are talented that will want to come to Notre Dame if you put in the work. But I do think defensive line recruiting is one that, if we're going to talk about all the positions in college football, I do think this is the hardest for Notre Dame to recruit for a number of reasons. And I think that's one where that's a position that more than any other is a show me position. And so you talk about some of the struggles that Notre Dame has had in recent years. I don't care to rehash those. We've talked about those a lot. But Notre Dame is in a stretch right now where the success they've had on the field, solid success in recruiting, especially at end, where are they now? How important is this period? And then also we're going to talk about could the success in this class be a springboard for future success in the trail? And so that's kind of where we're going to get to, Sean, because I think it's okay to acknowledge that way too many excuses were made about why Notre Dame didn't recruit the way it needed to over the years, while also acknowledging that there are some positions that are harder. I don't know if the next cornerbacks coach is going to be able to recruit as well as Mike Mickens did, because he's a bit unique of a coach and a recruiter. But it doesn't mean you then go back to taking a bunch of 3-stars that can't play. Right? It's not like one. But I do think that we can talk about D-line and say, yeah, this is a position that's a little bit harder. You got to be better evaluators. You got to be better recruiters. But it's still a position, if you get the right guy and you do the right things, is a position where you can have success. But I do believe it's one where the players, more than any other position, need to see it.
Well, for me, I think this is a great time, because I think what we're seeing in defensive end recruiting is something that Notre Dame has grown and matured into, right? There's a full process, not only in establishing the program, but then being able, not only in totality, big picture, but also nuances of the positional rooms to recruit, because you can't recruit every room the same way, but you can recruit to what the core of the program is. And so I think there were certain things, there was a lot of culture, pre-culture, but also veteran bricks laid in the defensive line room when Al Washington arrived. Like, he had an Isaiah Foskey, and then he had Howard Cross and the youngsters like behind. They were on the come. So he had a lot to work with. And when you have that from a recruiting standpoint, D, feel free to jump in. When you have certain things in life, sometimes you don't have the urgency in certain other areas, right? And as those things fade away or get closer to being non-existent, now there's more of an urgency. And what you're seeing is now an urgency, but I think there's an even bigger message of learning from mistakes, learning from what the original plan was to build things up and to build the roster up, to now we're shifting in philosophy. I think you're also seeing a shift in philosophy from the defensive line standpoint of who they want to go after and what they want to go after. We used to talk about Viper or that all the time. And now it's like, you know what? Let's just go get guys that can get after the passer, right? That is the one glaring thing that stood out if you watched that game early against Ohio State. If we had some guys that could get after Will Howard and rattle him, similar to what Michigan had, even though they didn't have anything else, they had enough to rattle him and then to interrupt what Ohio State wanted to do. And so that is something moving forward that they identified, that they learned from their experience last year. And I think that they truly learned who they can be. I don't know if they really believe they could do that. They probably always wanted to do that, but they had to see or find a path to how they could get to that, to be able to bring in multiple dynamic pass rushers to be able to do that. Yeah. And now they found a way to do it. Ryan, you have screamed from the mountaintop for at least 5 years, or at least 5 years that I can remember talking about, look, Notre Dame can go get top 50 talent.
Yes.
There's top 50 talent every year that loves academics that would love to come to Notre Dame. But you can't get them to believe if you don't believe.
Right.
If you don't respect people will only respect you as much as you respect yourself. And now Notre Dame, the head coach, respects Notre Dame far greater, in my opinion, in what they can offer in both areas than the predecessor. And that is why young men can believe what he's saying about what Notre Dame can do for them.
And that's why I said, Sean, kind of when we were talking a minute ago, or like at the beginning of the show, looking at it from standpoint of this is a position where I do think you need to show it. I mean, why did they lose Keon Keeley? Look, people talk about NIL. It really came down to Keon looked at Alabama and said, they have a track record of producing success. Al Washington and this staff don't, because they were in their first year at Notre Dame. Notre Dame hadn't put a lot of good players out into the NFL. They hadn't done a lot of things where they were able to develop top talent and top players and things like that on the D-line. Well, since then, not only did you have Isaiah Foskey's success and what he was able to do, with being a second-round draft pick, back-to-back 11-sack seasons, you go into the next season, you have the success that obviously Javonte Jean-Baptiste had. He got drafted. He didn't get drafted high, but he got drafted. But then he made a team as a seventh-rounder. He played for the Redskins this year. He had some success in the field. And then you look at what obviously he was able to do the last 2 years on the field with the job that Howard Cross and Riley Mills have done as a duo the last couple of years. There's film you can show of the defensive ends and the success they've had the last 2 years. And like, for example, I know one thing that's been very impactful with recruits, Sean, is being able to say, look at the Georgia game. Watch whose D-line was more dominant in the Georgia game. It was the Notre Dame D-line without their All-American D-tackle, without Boubacar Traore, without Jordan Patojo, and with Howard Cross, a shell of himself, because he was battling through. I mean, Howard Cross was playing with a bunch of different injuries late last year. He wasn't the same athlete. He wasn't in the same position he was the year before as a playmaker because of some of those injuries he was dealing with. And so now the proof is in the pudding, on top of, Sean, the team success. I think that's a big part of this. I think no position, people ask all the time, Sean, has Notre Dame benefited from the run they went on? And the answer is a very clear yes. But I think what it also has done is you have seen certain positions benefit more than others. And I think we're seeing that with the defensive line, that the season they had, the fact that the D-line was such a pivotal part of the success the last 2 years to the defense, the fact that they were able to overcome all the injuries and departures they had this year and still play good D-line started to make guys say, hey, look, this Washington guy, maybe he knows what he's doing. And I think that's all of that together has been impactful for this defensive line. And I'm going to say something else, Sean, here too. And Salty Virginia Peanuts made a comment earlier. He said, Brian and Sean and the chat, is it possible that the exit of Chad Bowden and one of his guys forced coaches to fill that void for a time? And that is exactly what Coach Washington needed. I'm going to say this. I do believe there's something to that comment from Salty. And this is not a anti-Chad Bowden comment at all. I do believe that some of the coaches in general, not just Al Washington, kind of allowed Chad Bowden to do more of the legwork than they can allow the people to do now because they're also new. Mike Martin's new. Jordan Blake is new. Myron Tungvaloa Mosa just got here. And so since Chad left in January to now, the coaches have had to carry the load. And what I think that has done is that I think Al Washington is one of the guys that we're seeing the result of that, because now it's all about him. It's not about, okay, well, we have this agreement or disagreement on who we're going to get, and hey, you go get these guys. I got to focus on this. I think you're seeing that with a lot of these coaches, that they've got to now carry the load. And I think at some positions you're seeing that's why maybe they're not recruiting as well as some other positions. But I do think this too, and it also wouldn't shock me if Al Washington was aware of some of the criticism that's been lobbed his way from a recruiting standpoint the last couple of years too. But we've also seen trends for Al Washington the last couple of years, where I think some people are still holding on to that first class with Justin Scott and those kind of guys, and we're just kind of ignoring it. Like, they got Boubacar, they got Bryce Young, they got Logan Thomas, they got Chris Burgess this last year's class, they got Davion Dixon. I'm very high on Gordy Solstead. People know that. Joe Reef's a good football player. It's been building to something, but eventually Al Washington had to kind of turn the corner and go from putting good classes together with a couple high upside guys and start putting classes together that looked like what the other top contenders are putting together. And that's what's in front of him now. And so sometimes when you put too much onto a recruiting coordinator, but you're also still trying to be involved, it can create to where people are moving in different directions. And I think we saw that a little bit the last couple of years, where now it's like, okay, Wash is like, hey, we're going out and getting the guys that I want now. And that's it. So there's no, like, the recruiting coordinator wants him to be focusing on this kid, but he's focusing on this kid. And then there's all this stuff. It's, I'm going out to get the guys that I want. And I think all those things add up together, Sean. On-field success at D-line, bigger picture, overall team success. Washington really feeling like maybe there's a little something he needs to show people and prove to people that the narratives about him maybe are a little bit off. And there's just all these different things. And on top of that, it is a loaded defensive line class that I think Notre Dame is looking to take advantage of as well. And so this gets us to here, where we are right now. And where we are right now is a stretch of 2 weeks that could then lead to a stretch of 2 months where Notre Dame could completely change their fortunes when it comes to defensive line recruiting. We talked about the Ebenezer Iwatade commitment this past weekend. Rodney Dunham announces his decision on Thursday. We obviously felt good for a while about where Notre Dame is there in that recruitment. You got a chance to close on that one. You had Dre Quinn on campus this past week. You had Mikhail Blade on campus this weekend. You have Tiki Hole and Elijah Golden are going to be making visits again in the upcoming weeks. You're going to get Xavion Griffin Haynes was supposed to come, had weather canceled that. He's going to still try to make it on campus. Kerry Wilder was on campus this week, which is huge for the staff. They getting all these top prospects on campus was very important, but you had to do well. And the one thing that we can say definitively, Sean, is the intel that we've gotten about every single defensive lineman that is visited is Notre Dame has flat out moved the needle with each and every one of them. And so that was crucial. We talked about that a few weeks ago. You had to do well in March and April to set yourself up to close down the road. And when you look at the defensive line recruiting, there's not a position on this team right now that is hotter from a recruiting standpoint than that, because not only the 26 kids, they just had a 5-star 2027 defensive lineman on campus and Chris Whitehead this past weekend. They had a kid who's probably going to be a 5-star in the 28 class, Marcus Fakatu, that was on campus a week or so ago as well. So it's not just this small number of 26 kids. They're getting studs in 27. There was a D tackle whose name escapes me right now. It's Sam something. Was it Sam Lejeune? Is that his
Sam Lejeune from Mississippi? Yeah,
highly ranked kid that was on campus. Devery Henderson is a 2026, or Devin Robertson, excuse me, is a 2027 D tackle that Notre Dame likes. He was on campus this last 2 weeks. So it's like, dude, they're processing big time defensive linemen through this place like it's nothing. I don't know if right now in this moment of time, if there's a position on this football team that's hotter when it comes to recruiting than what we're seeing on the defensive line when it comes to who they're getting on campus and then who they're positioning themselves to land, really, than the defensive line and what Al Washington is doing with that group.
And what you do also, and you know this just as well as anyone, you talked about the importance of recruits looking at who they're going to play with and who they're coming into the class with in their position room. But it goes even further than that, Brian, when you start to think about how you as a program have to be able to leverage against what the players are thinking about you. They're watching. So if you just get a commitment, and hypothetically, let's just say April 10th goes the way that we all want it to go for Notre Dame. Now, all of the other guys on the board know, man, it might be 2 slots left for the 6 of us. So now what are they thinking? Like in their mind, originally they might say, oh, I want to wait this out until June. But it's like, if they're really at the top of my list, can I wait until officials? Are these other guys going to wait until officials? And so this is a conversation that you have to have. And now you're changing the dynamic of what Fighting Irish defensive recruiting has been. The narrative has changed because now you're beginning to leverage things based upon operating from an area of strength. And I believe that's what Mike Mickens does best. He operates from an area of strength, knowing because of what he's done and what he's created. Now, every top defensive back, regardless of whether or not they're serious about Notre Dame, is going to be interested.
Right.
And because of that, now he can pick and choose and really prioritize who he wants to prioritize without feeling like, we've had this feeling before covering Notre Dame recruiting classes where it's like 1 or 2 guys, and it's like, yo, we have to, in order for this to be a good class in this position room, if they don't get that guy or they don't get this guy, I don't know. And so in the 26 class, there is no feeling like that. There are so many different combinations where you feel great. It's probably like 5 different combinations of kids where you feel like, okay, if that's the combination, Notre Dame is starting to change the narrative about defensive line recruiting. And that's because Notre Dame is starting to leverage their situation, right? And now they're shifting and elevating the floor of the room as well. Like if first 2, hypothetically, once again, if April 10th goes the way we all want it to go, if those are your first 2 commits in the defensive line, man, like, there's no way to go but up.
And you can't get commitment, Sean, if guys don't visit, right? So that's why we're talking about visits. And you can look at and to your point, you look at the quality of the visits. They would always get a guy here, a guy there that was ranked high, but you knew coming out of the visits they didn't really have a shot with that guy. And so this isn't just about, oh, these guys visited. It's what we said. It's the fact that look at where the way that Notre Dame has been able to move the needle with each kid as they visited. I've shared on the board, and I think I shared a little bit on this show, some of the things that Notre Dame is doing specifically with defensive linemen that is impacting how they feel about the team. And so you've got to be able to talk about all of it. And for some people in the chest, well, let's talk about commits. They just got a top 100 commitment on Saturday, and there's another top 25 player announcing on Thursday. You can't get it without this. And here's the difference, John, to your point, which I think was a very astute point, is in the past you had a shot with him in Mikhail Blade. Top ranked guy, top 150 guy. If Mikhail doesn't miss his junior season with an injury, missed his entire junior season, he's a top 100 recruit right now. Just flat out. I mean, that's where he was trending going into the 2025-4 season. In the past, it was if you don't get Mikhail Blade, you then got to kind of go down to this next guy who's going to be like down here, more of a solid player. But now it's like, okay, it's Mikhail Blade, it's Dre Quinn, it's Elijah Golden, it's Rodney Dunham. You got to get 2 of those 4. Where in the past it was you had the 1, and if you didn't get that one guy, there's a big drop off between him and the next guy on your board. And that's what's different about this class. Like last year, you had Damian Shanklin, and that was about it. And if you didn't get him, you were like, well, I don't know who the next Viper is going to be. They don't have any really Vipers on the board other than Marco Jones, who they didn't really want. So it's like, so then you got to move Dom Hulak there, and where you weren't originally recruiting him. And that's the things we've seen in the past, where now it's like, look, if you don't get this guy, you're going to get this guy, or you're going to get this guy. You got to get one of these 4. And that's why talking about all the guys that are visiting and the moves that Notre Dame is making matter so much. Because we just talked about the 4 ends on the board. Xavier Griffin Haynes was going to visit this weekend. He likes Notre Dame a lot as well, which is why he was going to come on his own dime, but they had some weather-related stuff that canceled his flight. He'll be back soon. That's 5 big-time ends. You got to get a couple of them. D-tackle is still a position where I think there's a lot more closing that needs to be done at that position than at defensive end. But again, the board looks good so far, to the point where they're slow playing Damari Simeon because of where they are with some other guys on the board. And that says a lot about, now they got to close on those guys. Otherwise, it's going to look like a bad strategy. But with Tiki Hola, they're trying to get Noah Clark on campus. They just got Kerry Wilder on campus, who just went from unranked to like the number 110 player in the country on the new Rivals update. So it's kind of like people trying to figure him out like they figured Ebenezer Iwatade out, who when Notre Dame first got on him and offered him in January, he was, I think, a consensus 3-star recruit. Now he's the number 36 player in the country. And so I think the evaluation that they're making too, Sean, what we're noticing in this class is they're getting on some guys right now before some other big schools are getting on guys. And I think that's helped them as well, because that has always been where I think the defensive line was lacking. This goes back for years, way before Al Washington. A lot of times, if it wasn't a Midwestern kid, they were really slow to get involved, to the point where, I don't know if you're going to get that guy. Keon Keeley was one of the exceptions, because they got on Keon really early. And so I think that's helped us quite a lot. And that's where they're in a position now where, okay, you got these great visits. You've got an opportunity to really, really close. And that's the key here, is you've now got to close. And they're doing that. Again, they just got Ebenezer Iwatade. Rodney Dunham commits to somewhere. He's picked between Notre Dame, Georgia. Was it Notre Dame, Georgia, Tennessee, I think South Carolina, and Duke? He's deciding in those schools on Thursday. Notre Dame's in a good place there. Tiki Hole is committing on May 10th. It's Notre Dame or SMU. You like where they are there. And then the other thing is, like, that's what was so important about getting that first domino to fall, Sean, because to your point, once that first domino falls, then it starts to kind of, go. So you've got a great board right now at defensive end. You got to close on it. You've got a pretty good board on D tackle, and I think it's going to grow over time. That's one position where it's a great D-line class as a whole. The edge class is way better than the D tackle class. And so that's why I think there's a little bit maybe more patience with the D tackle position than the end position. But even there, I like the early board. So here's the thing, Sean. Go ahead before I move on.
No,
You're going to say something.
You look at the current roster and what we're hearing about the depth they do have at the interior or the defensive line position. That plays into, year by year, how are you developing your board? Like, what are you doing? There's more urgency to go ahead and build up the ends than probably in 27, where you saw the defensive tackle offer the 27 a lot.
Huge D tackle offer board.
Yes, absolutely. So that shows you that they're
it's
very
a
aware.
Strong D tackle class from early on that we can tell, Sean.
Absolutely.
So that's a great point. That's the strategy that goes into recruiting. You can't look at a class by itself. I know as recruiting fans, we do that. We just look, this is where this class ranked. That's why I always do the 2-year grades. But when you're building a class, when I was a recruiting coordinator, and every recruiting coordinator, Mike Martin's thinking about this. Al Washington's got to think about this. Chris Ash's got to think about this. Marcus Freeman's got to think about this. It's not just about this class. So we're going to load up with a bunch of kids in this class, which is a solid class, or do we make sure that we meet our needs in this class, but we're going to really save up the room so we can then load up next year in what is a stronger class nationally? I mean, I've had that conversation with some Notre Dame. I mean, like last year's running back class. The reason that Notre Dame was a little picky on who they went after last year and why they didn't take 2, even though some people thought maybe 2 was needed, and initially they did take 2 early, is because I know for a fact that the staff didn't love the running back class nationally. That's why even though they got Nolan James, there was no push to get anybody else after he committed, because I don't think they loved the class. And they're looking ahead to the 2026 class, which was loaded at running back. So why take 2 in that class? We got a kid we like a lot. The process was a little weird, unnecessarily weird, but they got a guy that Dylan McCullough liked a lot. Now you try to get 2 in this class if you can, or even if you need it, depending on how your current roster shakes out. So you got to be thinking ahead. And I love the point that you made, Sean, because this is a loaded defensive end class. This is a loaded edge class. And there's a lot of hybrid guys that I like a lot in this class that are some of those, Riley Mills types that could maybe play D end, maybe move inside the tackle, which is why I think Notre Dame is willing to take 3 to 4 ends in this class. That where in past years, like you can't take 4 defensive ends. You can if one of those guys maybe is a kid whose body, like a Chris Burgess. I like Chris Burgess as an end, but he's also got one of those frames where he may just keep on growing. And naturally, I mean, Jason Onye, when he committed to Notre Dame, was 245. He was 6'5", 245. Now he's 6'5", 310. And he looks the same as he did then, muscular-wise. He doesn't have a big stomach. He just was a big kid that had that frame that you thought he could just keep on growing and keep on growing and keep on growing and then outgrow that end position. And that's exactly what happened. That's what Riley Mills was. You've seen Riley Mills in person, Sean. That kid doesn't have – he's got a very low body fat number. Jason Onye has a very low body fat number, but they're 300-plus pounders because they're just big shoulders, big heads, big hands, big feet, big thighs, big mix. They're just big kids. And like, you see Quentin Nelson at 340, and he looks a little different than maybe some cats that you see in the SEC that are 340 that, like, they got a whole lot going on down here. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that you look at, too, is there's a lot of those type of players in this class. And so that's where their focus is on, whereas 27 is loaded a D tackle, and that's where a lot of their emphasis is there. So I think it's really smart strategy with what they're doing on the D-line class as well, but you also can't ignore D tackle, and they're not. And that's why the Tiki Holas and the Kerry Wilders are so important, because you got to close on them too. Right now, the end is getting a lot of the buzz because the commitment on Saturday, you've got another potential edge coming up this weekend. I understand that, but they're not forgetting about the D tackle class in here. Now, here's my final piece to this, Sean, that I'm curious about. If you think it works this way. I'm a believer that football is still a very unique sport and very different from basketball recruiting, in that I still believe, even in the NIL era, there's a higher volume of football players, especially top players, that still understand winning is important, but also even if I'm about getting mine, even if I'm a selfish guy that wants to get mine, I got to understand if I'm a running back who wants to get mine, I better make sure I got some dudes blocking in front of me. I'm going to go somewhere where that's going to be good. If I'm a receiver who wants to get mine, I'm all about me, I want to get mine, I'm going to make sure I go somewhere that's got a quarterback that can give me the football and a good enough group around me to take the pressure off of me to where I'm not getting double and triple teamed every week. Even the kids who are selfish, to that extreme, are smart enough, for the most part, to understand, but I still got to be surrounded by other dudes, because then that's going to make it better for me. And I think defensive line is one of those positions, Sean, where you see that is, I don't want to be the only dude at a school, or I'm surrounded by a bunch of try-hard guys, which means every time we play a good team, they're going to be double and triple teaming me. I want to go somewhere where I can play with other dudes. And I think when you look at what Bryce Young did last year and Boubacar and getting a guy like Chris Burgess, who was highly ranked, if you can then add a really strong class of highly ranked guys in this class, I do think, Sean, that starts a bit of a run where now future classes look at that and say, hey, man, Notre Dame is now a hot place to be when it comes to this position. And at the end of the day, Sean, what have you and I have always said? Guys, Notre Dame is not 8, 9, 10 guys away. They're usually in each class like 2 to 3 guys away in each class. And a lot of times, one of those 2 to 3 is always a defensive lineman. Last year's class, really good D-line class. They were one guy short of it being an outstanding defensive line class. And that's kind of how it tends to be. Where, like, the year before, you got Bryce Young, you got Logan Thomas. You and I were super high on those kids. I like Cole Mullins as an edge player, but where did they come up short? Inside. It's like that in a lot of years. And so you look at it and say, if you can fix that, you're one guy away in each class, and that's what we're talking about this class can be. This could be the class that gets that one extra guy and then even raises the overall bar even higher that could then start a run of Notre Dame having success, because then Al Washington can say, look, I've got the on-field success. Now we've shown we've got the recruiting success. We can compete for championships. We can smack Georgia in the mouth. We can whoop them in the trenches. We can go play with Penn State. We can go do this. We can go do that. This is a place to be. And that's what I think adds even more pressure onto this 26 class, is because this could be sort of that gate opening class for Notre Dame recruiting the defensive line, which I would argue is, if that happens, then what we're going to talk about in part 2 of today's show gets a lot easier. A lot easier.
If that happens now, that is a position defensively that elevates and allows everyone else to be even more impactful. Like, you start getting guys up the middle that can rush the passer, stuff the run, pressure offenses, and direct them and funnel them into what you want them to do. And now you can start to squeeze offenses every week. And offenses come into games feeling like, man, I don't know what we can do. Now your linebackers can just run around. Do you know how many Alabama linebackers, looking back, look absolutely fantastic because they played behind the dudes they played behind? How many Clemson linebackers looked really good on the college level because they played behind behemoths on their defensive line? And then they get to the draft of the NFL and you start to say, yo, what happened? They were kind of good, that looked great because they played behind that week after week. And now, you know, when you kind of get exposed because you don't have all of that in front of you, now it kind of exposes like who you are as an athlete. And Notre Dame has athletes at the linebacker position. They have great players in the secondary already. So now this is going to elevate what is an already really elite linebacker and secondary group for Notre Dame's defense. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about, man, really taking off defensively, which, like you said, leads into like a conversation we're going to have later on in the show. But
yeah, Sean, I mean, you made – look, I would even argue even the great ones need that. I mean, I've used this example many times. Manti Te'o was a great player at Notre Dame. And anyone that tries to pretend that he wasn't, I think you either have a personal problem with Manti, or you don't know what you're looking for when you're talking NFL, you know, and or when you're talking linebackers. I mean, Manti was a generational player. But I remember the Pitt game in 2012 when Lewis Nix was out in the first half. And Pitt was just chopping Manti the whole game. They were just getting up to the second level the whole first half, just chopping Manti. Cut, free releases. Because blocking Tony Springman, with all due respect to Tony, with all due respect to the late Kona Schwenke, blocking those cats is a whole lot different than having to block Lewis Nix. In the whole first half, they're just getting a Manti, just chopping him, and Pitt jumps up to this big lead. Man, they bring Lewis back in the second half because he was banged up. They were trying to preserve him, and he plays a little bit in the second half, and when he was on the field, all of a sudden Manti starts cleaning up again. And guess what? That's not a coincidence, Sean. It's not a coincidence at all. It's not a coincidence that Clemson had an elite defense in 2018, a defense where their top two of their top three tacklers were linebackers. And their third guy was Isaiah Simmons, who did a little bit of everything. And that Clemson team, as good as it was in 2018, both of their starting inside linebackers in the team went undrafted. Trey Lamar went undrafted and Kendall Joseph went undrafted. Well, why were they so effective? Because they had I think 3 first-round draft picks and a 4th-round draft pick playing on the D-line in front of them. That's why. A lot of guys can look good playing middle linebacker when you've got Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence and those guys right in front of you playing. And so you are correct. It impact, and think about it. Notre Dame hasn't had an issue recruiting linebackers. Start having more success recruiting the D-line, and that becomes a whole lot easier. So I think it's a very important thing, but I also believe that when you start that trend, that future prospects take notice. Well, aren't they worried about competition? Well, it doesn't seem to be a problem at Ohio State with wide receivers. It was never a problem at Alabama with D linemen. It was never a problem with Georgia at those positions. It hasn't been a problem at Notre Dame with cornerbacks. I mean, Leonard Moore committed to Notre Dame knowing he had to deal with Christian Gray, and who was a year ahead of him, and Benjamin Morrison. Christian Gray committed to Notre Dame knowing he had to play behind Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison. And you look at this year's class, Dallas Golden knew that he had Christian Gray and Leonard Moore and, guys in front of him. Mark Zachary already knew that not only had them, but they already had Dallas Golden and Cree Thomas in the class, right? Like, great players, first of all, had the confidence to know, like, hey, if I'm as good as I think I am, I'm going to go play. I'm going to be that guy. But I'm also going to be part of a unit that's going to be really good. You can't avoid me, because I remember talking to Cam Hart's mom, and one of the things that he talked about, one of the reasons he chose to come back for 2023 was a positive of Benjamin Morrison's emergence late in the year convinced him to come back, because Cam got frustrated because nobody throw at him. And he kind of felt like going into the next year, like with Benjamin coming back, like, well, lo and behold, they threw at him even less the next year because of how good Cam was. You know what I mean? But he was a heck of a player. And so you look at those different positions, great players aren't afraid of competition. Kingston Viliama-Asa is not going to not come to Notre Dame because they got Drake Bone and Jaden Osbury, who were highly ranked players the year before. Just like Madden Framo is not going to be afraid to come to Notre Dame, even though they got Kingston in the year ahead of him and Bodie Cahoon the year ahead of him. And because they got Drake Bone and Jaden Osbury the year before that and Jalen Sneed the year before that. You get what I'm saying? So I think that this is an opportunity where Notre Dame, with this 26 class, this could serve as the class that starts a bit of a run at Notre Dame if Al Washington can close the way that we hope and think that he can. And then even if he leaves at some point in time, we're going to always look back to this class as maybe having to be the one that started that run. And that's what's the opportunity. They're not there yet. They got one defensive lineman committed in this class. One. But if they can finish and close on this really impressive board, and you look at where these kids are from, right? Ebenezer's from North Carolina. Rodney's from North Carolina. Tiki is from Texas. Kerry Wilder's from Florida, from California. Noah Clark is from North Carolina. Xavion Griffith-Haynes, I believe, is from North Carolina. Drake Quinn is from Georgia. Eliza Golden is from Florida. There's only one local kid in the group, and that's Mikael Blade. That's it. So, I mean, these are kids that are from areas where Notre Dame wants to keep recruiting big-time players, where there's big-time D linemen every year. So I think if they can close the way that we hope they can, and the way it looks right now that they are, this could be sort of a gateway class for defensive line recruiting. Because if defensive line recruiting catches up to the rest of the defensive recruiting, that's going to be fun to watch, Sean.
And like you said, starting that trend is important. You see a couple of North Carolina visitors, they took pictures with Bryce Young. They obviously know who Bryce Young was in that state for years. They respect him. They see him develop. They see him flashing in his freshman year. And this is something you talk about opportunity, because we hear that a lot. Opportunity to play early, right? And opportunity does not necessarily mean that you're starting. Even if you don't play, opportunity is something that you feel because you're being developed to play. And sometime during your freshman season, you're ready to go if needed. Leonard Moore was ready to go when needed. Pre-game, Louisville, Christian can't go. All right, Leonard, go make 2 impact plays. He was ready to go, and he got better. So it's not
getting
about
beat several times, Sean. Like,
absolutely
didn't phase him. He kept making plays.
Phase him at all. So when you talk about Mark Zachary, Dallas Golden, these are guys that are going to have the feeling, because what has been put in place, that they're going to be ready to go, even if their opportunity doesn't come during the 2025 season. When it does come, they're ready. That's what it truly means when you're talking about opportunity, right? Quality goes in before the game goes on. That's what Mike Mickens has developed, and then that is what Al Washington is going to have to develop with these young guys. If he gets them committed, he's going to have to create an atmosphere where other kids in 27 and 28 can say, oh, Bryce Young played. Oh, Logan Thomas played. Oh, they took the next step. Oh, man, Ebenezer got a chance to play. Chris Burgess got a chance to play. Not comparing snaps, but just having opportunity to develop and grow goes beyond actually getting on the field Are you going to be ready when your time comes? That's what true opportunity is all about. Because if you're not ready and develop when that chance comes, what's really been done? That's what players buy into. They buy into, hey, this guy, this coach is going to have me ready when my time comes, and I trust him. So that's one of the most important things that I think Al Washington is going to get an opportunity to show, because he walked into a situation where he had veterans and he
Right.
had people and youngsters that were in development that he could lean on for his first 2 to 3 years. And now that line and his job as a coach is now transitioning. His purpose now is transitioning, and it looks like he's taking full advantage of that.
Because what was one of the things you and I talked about going into the season was we're going to learn a lot about Al Washington this year, because yes, you had the two veteran returning defensive tackles. Yes, you had RJ Oben coming in, who we were expecting much more from. But after that, it was okay. Jordan Patel hasn't done anything, didn't do anything last year. Yeah, I get the Bubakar has potential and Burnham has potential and Bryce Young has potential, Junior has potential. None of them have really done anything meaningful. What's your rotation going to look like behind your two veteran tackles? Like, he can't just rely on all the guys that were coached by somebody else this year. He's going to have to show it. But then it was even more so than we thought because of the injury to Jordan early and Bubakar early. And because of the fact that RJ Oben was I'm not saying to take a shot at the kid, but he had a very disappointing season when you look at what he had done in past years and what he did this year. Now, I'll take all that disappointment for the one play he made against Georgia. Like, if you were to say, hey, he doesn't make that play, but he has a much better year all year, I don't care. You needed that one play. It was a huge game-changing play against Georgia. So, you're always going to remember RJ Oben for that play. But he didn't give you what you hoped he would have given you. You had all the injuries. You had Jason Onye, who came out and was playing great early, development by him, and then he goes away. And all of a sudden, Donovan Hines starts making plays. Junior Tuilamaka starts making plays. Burnham comes back from injury. He starts making plays. Bryce Young just kind of grows steadily throughout the year. Now, all of a sudden, instead of saying, well, we know Al Washington can coach other people's players who were developed by other guys, but can he develop players on his own, basically from kind of start to finish? Guys that he, like there's Gabriel Rubio played for Elston for a year, and Onye played for a year, and Hines for a year, but they were developed by him. Burnham was developed by him. Junior was developed by him, and those guys allowed them to go have the success, which I think changed the narrative a little bit, and I think impacted a little bit. And so now you talk about that success. So he now has things he can point to on top of some of his former players doing well in the NFL. They now have things they can point to say, hey, the development piece can be here. We don't have to rely on veteran players. And the other thing that goes into this, Sean, is Notre Dame's recruiting in a way where it tells me, numbers-wise, they don't want to have to keep relying on the portal the way that they have. They're not going after a couple guys. They're trying to load up with a bigger D-line class. If the more you load up with high school kids, the fewer portal options you have. And that's a good sign for me too. Because I'm all for taking a portal guy to fill a need. I'm so glad they went and got Javonte Jean-Baptiste. I'm really glad they went out and got Jared Dawson this offseason. But in the future, you don't want them to have to rely on that if you don't have to. But if you do, it's a plug a hole here, plug a hole there. Hey, this guy maybe was better than we thought he was going to be, so he left a year earlier like a Benjamin Morrison. I don't know that when Mike Mickens recruited Benjamin Morrison, he was thinking he's a 3-and-done player. As much as I loved Benjamin Morrison, I wasn't sure of that was who he was. Now, you knew after his freshman year that's what he was going to be, barring injury. But I don't know that was so that happens too, and sometimes, you weren't necessarily as prepared for that, or maybe a younger guy's not developing quite as quickly as you want him to, or there's an injury there, and you got to go to the portal, plug a hole. Totally fine with that. But when you take the size class they took last year, because you had 5, right? You had Burgess, Reef, Davion, Hulak, and Gordy Solstead. You're going to take minimum 5 this year. That tells me, and I won't be shocked if they get to 6. I'd be a little surprised if they went past 6, but I think they would like 5 to 6. That tells me they're trying to build their lines through high school recruiting, and that is a great sign, in my opinion. That's where Notre Dame has to do it. because, guys, it gets really expensive to go into the portal and get a D tackle. That's an elite player. Or a defensive end. That's an elite player. Really hard. And you get them for 1 year. So I like the way they're going about it, Sean.
Love it. Gotta close.
That's
close.
That's it.
Gotta close.
That's it. We'll have a better sense of that by Thursday, right? And then I'm very curious to hear, like, one of the things we're going to do with our recruiting coverage is we're going to be following up with a lot of these defensive end commits or recruits and be like, so what does this mean for you if they're able to get Rodney Dunham on Thursday? And so we'll definitely have some shows about that moving forward. But yes, closing is the key. But you've got to do well to get kids on campus, and you got to do well during the visits to be in position to close. As we talked about at the beginning of this whole spring recruiting period, we said, look, you got to get these on campus, kids on campus, and you have to then show them the future and how you can develop them on and off the field. And so far, they've done a great job on that. Now it's taking those next steps. Because the other thing, too, is schools that like Ebenezer Iwatani and schools that like Rodney Dunham are not going to stop recruiting them.
No.
Right. So they don't strike me as kids that are going to flip, but Keon Keeley didn't strike me that way early on either. So this is going to be a dogfight all the way until December, but Notre Dame has done a tremendous job so far with these guys. So yeah, it's a great place to be. So that's going to be it for today, for part 1 of today's show, Sean. We'll get to part 2 next here, but do us a favor, folks, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, give us a 5-star review if you're listening via whatever podcast platform you listen to. But as always, Sean, if they want all the latest recruiting updates that you guys are putting up, that we're putting up, all the intel that I'm putting up, all the football analysis that we do, all the great conversation we have, the place for that is at boards.irishbreakdown.com. That's the place to go to get all that, and it's also the best way that you can support what we're doing here at Irish Breakdown. So you can find that, again, at boards.irishbreakdown.com.